pleasant morning, everyone. So we are the Group 4 and our report is all about the perspective planning. So in here, we will tackle about the meaning, the characteristics, the objectives, the importance, and also the steps in perspective planning. So before discussing about perspective planning, we are going to define first what is perspective. So perspective refers to a person's point of view or outlook on the current state of education. So in its most basic form, perspective planning is the process of establishing objectives, deciding on actions to attain those objectives, and mobilizing the resources required to carry out those activities. In addition, perspective planning outlines how objectives will be met via the use of existing resources. Strategic or long-term planning are other terms for perspective planning. Perspective planning is often referred to as strategic because a strategy is meant to fulfill the educational institution's objectives in this form of planning. In general, the phrase strategic refers to management of army before war. This sort of planning necessitates the use of a unique and methodical method. Moreover, the planning is also known as long-term planning since it defines the future course of action or foresight education system for the long term from an educational standpoint. In addition, long-term planning might last anywhere between 15 to 20 years.
Moving on, there are 7 characteristics of perspective planning. The first characteristic is comprehensive approach is being used. This covers all the stages of education, from primary to higher education, as well as all forms of education, both informal and informal. Number 2, perspective planning is prepared for a period of 10 to 20 years. However, this is divided into subsector plans from the span of 3 to 5 years. Why? Because these subsectors are needed to be modified and evaluated on a regular basis. Also, this is to check if the plan made or prepared are still effective and efficient in that certain time bound. For the third characteristics, this gives us the reason why we are planning. We plan because we want improvement in changes happen in the future that is more better than today. Moving on, and the fourth characteristics of perspective planning, which is identified as perspective planning is continual dynamic process, which means that this planning is never an ending process. Because it is somehow like this. Plans are prepared in a specific period of time. However, in that end of period of time, these plans are subjected to re-evaluation and reviewed to the light of new requirement and a changing condition. In the light of new requirement and changing condition. For the fifth characteristics of perspective planning, it emphasizes that planning is based on team collaboration, institution's vision, innovation, and the dedication to the job. It is a teamwork collaboration because we plan as a group, not as an individual. And by doing that, we are making the plan more attainable and achievable for the reason that everyone is accountable in the learning, in the planning process. Also, institution vision is one of the bases of making planning because I think this is one of the main driver on making planning. Another basis is the innovation and the dedication of work or a job. This is for the reason that we need improvement or we need a change. Moving on the sixth characteristic of perspective planning, which is it follows a set of rules. Like planning must be organized in a logical order or in a systematical process, which means that we cannot proceed to the other step if we did not clearly identify or complete the first step. For the last characteristics, which is the perspective planning, is influenced by changing environmental condition. Because we live in the world that is change is constant, plans are must be made or prepared to be flexible, to adapt, or for modification that is based on environmental conditions. Those are the 7 characteristics of perspective planning. With that, we can also define perspective planning as ongoing, future-oriented, innovative, and comprehensive plan for an educational system or institution that is implemented on a regular basis over a period of 3 to 5 years.
So ngayon naman punta tayo sa objectives of perspective planning, no. So dito sa perspective planning is its main goal is to anticipate the future vision. Its goal is to establish a long-term direction by dividing the primary plan into independent but interconnected subplans. So dito sa perspective planning, it doesn't only focus on the present but also looking forward towards future development. So thinking about it, it's a continuous and step-by-step process na kailangan may mga sub-plans kang gagawin in order to achieve a better and greater plan. So, dito sa perspective planning na to, parang may tatlong question or core questions na dapat mong i-consider. So, first question or core questions that need to be considered is where are we now and where do we need to be in within a span of 5 or 10 years. So, parang dito is magsisit ka ng time na alam mo na kung saan pwede mong ma-achieve yung plan or yung goal na gusto nyong ma-achieve. So, parang dito is we're already visualizing and considering where and how much could we achieve within that given amount of time. So, yun yung sa first core question. So, next naman is what shifts are needed in order for us to get there. So, ano ba yung mga kakailanganin natin gawin or yung mga steps that we need to take in order to achieve that goals. So, next naman that we need to consider in perspective planning is what is the approach that we need in order to achieve success. So, ano yung mga kailangan natin gawin? What are the actions that we need to take? So, yun yung mga iilan sa mga kailangan natin consider in perspective planning. The next objectives of perspective planning is to enhance the educational institution's management as well as the teaching and learning process. So, yun yung sa objectives of perspective planning.
So today we're gonna discuss about the importance of perspective planning. As we move on, it is also a action-oriented planning is a feature of perspective planning. It is carried out in a methodical manner after it has been implemented. The plan is monitored and assessed. Each stage is followed by a review of the functions to see if there are any modification that needs to be made. Next, perspective planning has given the institution's employees a sense of belonging and ownership of the goal. This planning procedure includes all human resources. Next, the perspective or strategic planning process allows instructors, students, and others to make balanced decisions for institutions' future. Number 4, the relevance of outcomes is emphasized in perspective planning. As a result, strategic planning assists in balancing the institution's demands and resources. And number 5, it establishes the purpose, vision, values, goals, and objectives of the school district. This allows stakeholders to express and agree on the same objectives and work toward the same goals. And last, the number 6, participating in feedback sessions with the community and other stakeholders is an important part of the perspective planning process. This early information aids the learning in developing a more targeted approach and increasing community support. So that's all for our importance in perspective planning.
Moving forward on the last part of our report, which is the steps in perspective planning. The following are the steps of perspective planning in order. Number 1. Guidelines for setting organizational objectives. The plan's objectives are established at the start of the perspective planning process. Financial, material, and human resources are all recognized to be used in educational institutions. Through strategic planning, realistic and adaptable objectives are set to enhance the institution's intended direction. Objective must be flexible to the fact that the goals should be adaptable to the circumstances. Also, objectives should be achievable, specific, measurable, time-bound, and relevant. The second step is the benefit of objective. The strategic plan is built on the foundation of objectives. It leads to the collaborative work inside the organization. The objectives hold the employees accountable and inspire them to complete their assigned task. Also, it reduces the amount of time spent wasting because all actions are planned in a methodological manner, as well as positive consequences may be predicted.
And now, let's move on to the third steps of perspective planning. So, dito sa third steps of perspective planning is yung developing strategies. So, dito sa developing strategies, we must always remember that it was created with the organization's goals, objective, mission, and vision in mind. So, we must remember na kailangan yung mga plan na gagawin natin is kailangan nag-a-align siya sa objectives or sa vision natin. So, dito ulit papasok yung 3 core questions na sinabi ko kanina na wherein you're going to visualize where could you be or how much could you achieve within a given amount of time. The next is you're going to think of the shape and the approaches that you need to do in order to achieve success. So, yun yung sa third steps. In addition, it was a step-by-step process na hindi ka pwedeng mag-shortcut kasi there are many factors that needed to be considered while you're devising the plan. And while devising the plan, and again, as I said earlier, it must be aligned with the organization's goal, objective, and mission or the vision. So, that's for the step 3. And now, let's move on to the step 4, which is the strategic implementation. So, dito sa strategic implementation, after devising the plan, this is where you're going to carry out the plan that has been made. And even though it was made, kailangan all the participants should always devote themselves and always fulfill their role. So, kaya kahit na implement pa rin siya, again, it was a step-by-step and continuous process, no? So, the participants needs to utilize the resources that they could in order for them to gather appropriate, up-to-date, and accurate data. So, bakit nga ba kailangan na they still need to devote themselves in their roles, no? So, ganito kasi yan. Even though tapos na yung implementation, they still need to gather the up-to-date and accurate data because that will be used for the next step. Again, as I mentioned earlier, it was a step-by-step and continuous process. And yung mga nag-gather na data, yun yung magagamit sa next step, which is the monitoring and evaluation. So, yun yung sa strategic implementation.
Step 5, Strategy Monitoring and Evaluation. To assess the desired outcome of perspective planning, the strategies, tactics, and action plans are appraised, monitored, and reviewed on a regular basis. As a result, future judgments and behaviors will be better. Data feedback is also useful for determining a program's strengths and shortcomings, as well as the amount to which it achieves the plan's objectives. Now we will now have the step 6, which is the strategic plan review. So the strategic plan is reviewed in order to make acquired adjustments to the educational system and to modify its path as a result of these assessments. Now we have here the last step, which is the outcomes. So finally, the intended outcome is identified in order to satisfy the institution's expectations. Perspective planning is vital to an organization because it provides a sense of direction and outlines measurable goals. In addition, it is a tool that is useful for guiding day-to-day decisions and also for evaluating progress and changing approaches when moving forward. Before ending our report about the perspective planning, we have here a quote by Anne M. Mulcahy. So one of the things we often miss in succession planning is that it should be gradual and thoughtful, with lots of sharing of information and knowledge and perspective, so that it's almost a non-event when it happens. So that's all. Thank you everyone for listening.